3 weeks ago, Pastor Shawn asked us during his sermon to identify which story in the Bible is our story. After church, Marla asked me in the car, which story is your story? I answered without hesitation, the parable of the Good Samaritan. She asked smartly, which of the characters are you? Her question threw me for a loop. Not the donkey, I smiled. Not so fast, she replied. At one point or another in life, I have played all the characters in the parable. I have been stripped and beaten many times and left half dead, even if figuratively, only to rise again by His grace. At many marathons, I wore a shirt that proclaimed Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I have been the innkeeper, accepting denarii to take care of my fellow man. Many times, when an opportunity to serve arises, I tune to my favorite radio station, WIIFM, What's in it for me? More often in life, I have played the Good Samaritan, but this is neither the time nor the place to boast about giving what was never mine in the first place. Yet at times, I have paid the innkeeper to take care of my problem and to allay my guilt, thereby justify walking away from the discomfort and the inconvenience of the suffering. And God knows, I have been the priest and the Levite, excusing my inaction by rationalizing that the man on the side of the road must have done something wrong to earn the beating, and that God intended this outcome, and who am I to question God's will? As quickly as I identified with the parable of the Good Samaritan, I moved away from it as my story. And my mind sought an alternative interpretation of Pastor Shawn's question. Did he really mean to ask us, what do we think is our story? But rather, what story do others associate with me? Who do men say I am? Throughout my years of service to our country, many senior leaders have referred to me as a lone voice in the wilderness. The first time an Air Force general called me that, I retorted jokingly, and you know what happened to his head, sir, right? Gradually, I accepted the yoke of a lone voice in the wilderness as affirmation to continue the fight, and a resignation that my fate will be no different from John's fate, both literally and figuratively. I lost count how many decapitations I have survived, how many flat tires I have changed, and how many threats I've endured. Long before John the Baptist, the prophet Elijah was a lone voice in the wilderness. Last summer, I dedicated a Sunday to studying Elijah, the patron saint of my childhood village in Lebanon. Between Elijah and John, we can construct a picture of the loneliness in the wilderness. Today's society describes conveniently a lone voice in the wilderness as someone who expresses an unpopular idea or opinion. As the unpopular view often goes against accepted norms and threatens established functions, the lone voice is either ignored or drowned. As the lone voice gets louder and more believable, the reaction of the establishment grows more violent. As my lone voice grew louder and more threatening, Air Force security had advised me to vary my travel routes from home to work, lest I end up the character in the ditch from the parable of the Good Samaritan. Every morning I pick at random among a dozen different routes to work, all with good coffee shops on the way. A lone voice in the wilderness suffers, or shall I say enjoys, three main frames of mind: self-doubt, withdrawal, and endurance. Allow me to expound on my experiences with these. In the face of a persistent, unrelenting, and overwhelming opposing view, the lone voice develops doubt about the veracity of his own view. The line blurs between what is true and what is false. Self-doubt sets in, and self-doubt often leads to withdrawal and isolation. I've struggled many times with self-doubt. Can they all be wrong? What if they were right and I was wrong? Has my stubbornness blinded me to the truth? What is truth, after all? Is truth relative or is it absolute? While my episodes of self-doubt are few and far in between, these crises tend to last for a very long time, usually 1 to 2 minutes, and then I snap out of my doubt and return to the fight. Even Elijah grew tired of the fight. After he killed the prophets of Baal and Jezebel sought to kill him, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." No, I'm never tempted to do the same. Withdrawal, isolation, and loneliness bring me quiet time for prayer, for reflection, and for rebuilding my strength and my faith. Running 26.2 miles at 8,000 to 10,000 feet in northern Yellowstone National Park was a great time for self-pity and prayer. Running 26.2 miles around the rim of Crater Lake in Oregon, while bleeding from the face and the limbs because I took a face plant 3 steps into the race, with sweat seeping into my wounds, was a painful communion with my Creator and a bridge to rebuilding my faith in truth. There is truth. With the endurance from over 80 marathons sustaining me, I have fought my fiercest fights fresh off miles of loneliness. Withdrawing into the wilderness, coupled with prayer and reflection, gives the lone voice a rare sense of humor and poignant sarcasm. Elijah taunted the prophets of Baal. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is God. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." I find myself often taunting and mocking my detractors as they shout louder and build higher their temples of ignorance and incompetence. And my inner voice, Marla, reminds me to attack the problem, not the people. And I often retort that the people are the problem. Then one day, my fight will come to an end, and the newspaper will report Dr. Kamal Jabbour of Pompeii collapsed after crossing the finish line of his last marathon. He is survived by his loving wife, Marla, his father-in-law, Ronald, 110, his mother-in-law, Patricia, 108, children, Brenda, Mark, Paula, and 14 grandchildren, most of them Marks, 3 cats, 2 dogs, and 1 woodchuck under the garden house. My obituary will probably say that I was the 3rd of 4 children, that my father was a decorated member of the Order of the British Empire in Her Majesty's Foreign Service, that I played chess in high school, won 3 national championships, 2 international tournaments, that I qualified and made the Olympic team in a boycott year, that I survived 4 years of war in Lebanon, including a bomb that hit my house, and that I studied electrical engineering at candlelight at the American University of Beirut, that I graduated with the highest grade point average of the entire graduating class, but did not receive the Penrose Award because I was not diverse enough, that I pursued graduate studies in England and received a doctorate at the age of 24, that I served on the faculty at Syracuse University for 25 years, followed by 25 years of service in the Air Force as senior scientist, where I was the lone voice advocating the assurance of our national security missions, that I escaped often into the wilderness to run marathons in all 50 states, and that I spent my twilight years imaging the stars. But is this really my story? Or will my tombstone tell my true story in the simple words of Paul to Timothy? I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. This is my story. I'll wake up tomorrow morning to resume the fight, renewed by strength and faith that will endure until I finish the race.